What's up, football fans? Welcome to an exclusive special content episode of The Extra Point with me, your host, Phil Ruskin. We're going to do a season preview today for the Players Club 10 team PPR. Start two quarterbacks, two running backs, three wide receivers, double flex, one tight end, half PPR. I'm going to go ahead and talk through each of the 10 teams here, where I see some ceiling, where I see some really exciting options for each of the different rooms that we're going to cover. I do see 6 teams in the league this year that are going to be fighting for the 4 playoff spots. So as we go through each of the teams, I'll tell you how I see them, and then obviously we'll wrap the show with telling you my predictions for who's going to be in that coveted top 4 and vault into those playoff spots. So let's go ahead and bring the board up so everybody can see it. Let's start here with Jesse. Josh Allen, obviously the quarterback one of quarterback ones. No stress, going to lock and load him each and every week into that QB1 spot. He has finished as the QB1, had an awful season and finished as the QB2, and then went QB1. So ceiling performance, certainly overall QB1 in his range of outcomes. At the QB2 spot, it's Baker Mayfield. We did see Baker Mayfield finish as a QB1 last year. It was the only time in his career he's been a quarterback one. Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator, heads to Carolina as the head coach. I don't see a QB1 season for Baker. I do think he regresses back to a QB2 season, but that is totally fine in a QB2 spot. Jesse used his first round pick on JJ McCarthy, which from a dynasty perspective is great. But obviously for this season, going on IR means he is no longer viable. So Drew Lock and Sam Howell, it's a thin quarterback room. Jesse's in a rebuild. There's no stress there. I love what he's got for 3 quarterbacks for 2 spots for next year in Dynasty. But for this season, obviously, it's going to be a stretch to fill in some of those bye weeks. And of course, if anything happens injury-wise, there'll be waiver wire pickups or trades. As we get into the running back room, it's very, very thin. Jesse did a phenomenal job rebuilding the wide receiver room. So the running back room had to take a hit. You can't build it all in one year. That's just how it goes. And transparently, I don't think the expectation was that Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks would go off the board at the end of the first round. I think Jesse at the 202 and 203 was probably anticipating at least one of those guys being there, but sometimes it's just the way the board falls. So we're looking at Brian Robinson Jr. as the RB1 in this room with Zach Charbonnet. Obviously, no ceiling for those guys, but again, in a rebuild, you're kind of working with what you have. What I do like, let's take a big positive here, is I really like Braylon Allen, Will Shipley, Marshawn Lloyd, and Jalen Wright. I do think that they are going to have good value potentially this season, but really good value next year as they kind of assimilate into their new teams. We love the offense in Miami. We love the offense in Green Bay. So really excited for what this room could become. And again, guys get hurt. It's very possible that those guys have some late season appeal. So even though it doesn't look great on paper, it may not be as bad when it comes to real life fantasy as it may look today. So I like there's some pieces in there that I like with some upside. Jesse strengthened his team outside of Josh Allen, obviously, is the wide receiver room. So you've got Zay Flowers, Brian Thomas Jr., and Christian Watson locking down the top 3 spots. Zay Flowers is going to have a really nice season as the wide receiver 1, but the second pass catching option there in Baltimore behind Mark Andrews. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to end up being the wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville this year. It may start slow, but I do love what he did. 4.33 at the combine. Great downfield speed. 1,177 yards last year at LSU with 17 touchdowns, catching passes from Jaden Daniels, who is obviously an NFL starting quarterback and the 102 in this year's NFL draft. So like BTJ there. Josh Palmer is really interesting because someone's going to have to catch passes in Los Angeles. And Palmer is the only one that has any sort of rapport with Herbert. So he is certainly viable as a wide receiver 3 and even a flex play. And then, of course, you got Jerry Jeudy, Xavier Legette, Mike Williams kind of mixing in as guys who could provide some flex appeal for Jesse going forward. At the tight end position, it is my league winner, Jake Ferguson, de facto wide receiver 2 in Dallas, because after CeeDee Lamb, it's Jake Ferguson, boys and girls. Don't forget it. If you are in a redraft league coming up this weekend, please do yourself a favor. If you don't get one of the early tight ends, please draft Jake Ferguson in the 7th round and feel really, really good about getting yourself a guy who I believe could finish inside the top 5 at the position this year. Obviously, there's not enough here to have ceiling at the wide receiver, or excuse me, at the running back position. So I don't see Jesse in the top 6 this year. But again, I like what he's got in terms of some pieces. So if he can have a strong draft or make some solid trades in this next offseason, we may be having a very different conversation about Jesse's team when we do the 2025 season preview. Let's move on to the only team in this league who has never missed the playoffs. And no, that's not the announcer's curse. I do like Mike's group here. I think Jared Goff is easily the QB1 in this room. He's being disrespected right now as the QB 15. I think that's mostly because guys are expecting other players who are coming off injury to finish ahead of where they did last year. But Goff to me is the clear QB1. And I think when you look at the QB2, you're basically streaming from your own team, Herbert or Lawrence, on a weekly basis. So he's got 3 guys for 2 spots, 2 guys for 1 spot because Goff will lock down a spot every single week. So good quarterback room, no real stress there when it comes to having to figure out who your quarterbacks are on a weekly basis. And there's Breece Hall as the RB1 in this room, the clear RB1. There's only about 5 guys I think could be the overall RB1. Breece Hall is in that conversation. It's absolutely 100% within his range of outcomes. And I do think he finishes as a top 3 running back this year, regardless of if he finishes as the overall RB1 or not. At the RB2 spot, it gets interesting for Mike. Tony Pollard's in a timeshare. Zamir White had a crazy finish to last year, but I don't think that pace is sustainable, and I don't project the Raiders to be very good. But volume is king in fantasy, and there's just not much behind Zamir White there, so we'll see. I think realistically, you're looking at, a combination of Pollard and White as the RB2. They both provide a little bit of flex value. Jonathan Brooks is on IR. I think he's going to be fine. He's going to be really good as a rookie. It's just going to take some time. It could be week 6, 7, 8, before they actually get him in there. And obviously we don't expect them to just throw him into the lion's den. I do expect Chuba to still be a little bit relevant until Brooks is fully ready to take over. So a little bit of a slow burn for Brooks. And I think Mike will be very happy he has him in Dynasty, but for this season, obviously temper the expectations just a little bit. Mike's real strength is the wide receiver room. It is Puka Nacua, Drake London, and Stephon Diggs locking down the top 3 spots. With Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Ladd McConkey in the mix with Cortland Sutton for flex appeal and a little bit of bye week fill-in. Mike's running back room's pretty thin, so I'm going to go ahead and say he's probably more than likely rolling out 5 wide receivers with the 3 and then the 2 in the flex. That's how I would play the team. I think that gives him the highest ceiling going forward. It's half PPR. And I think that's ultimately what we'll probably see when you're playing against Mike. Looking at the tight end room, simple. Put Mark Andrews in your tight end spot. Put George Kittle in a flex spot. Flip them. Put them in the tight end spot and flex spot. I don't care what you do, but both of them should be involved. Mike's got the best tight end room in the league, other than Eric, who we'll get to at the very end. There's no stress for him. He knows he's got 2 guys that can finish at the inside the top 10, and I think Andrews can certainly finish. I have him currently as my preseason tight end 1. I think he can finish as the overall tight end 1 again. The Ravens really didn't bring in any new pass catchers. They brought in Tez Walker, who's a rookie, but Bateman's always banged up. Zay Flowers' ceiling is lower. Mark Andrews is the wide receiver 1 for that team. Easy decisions for Mike at the tight end position on a weekly basis. I see Mike as a top 6 team, and we'll find out at the end of the show if he's going to make the playoffs. Moving on to Ryan, heavyweight fantasy here. Ryan's team has been bitten by the injury bug the last 2 years. I think it's very, very possible, and I project that this is the year that it works out for him. So really great quarterback room. Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, no stress, lock and load each of those guys every single week. Will Levis is interesting. I think he's playing for his job. He threw 4 touchdowns in his first game. He looked like he was going to set the world on fire, and then he threw 4 touchdowns over the next 7 games. So they've given him every opportunity to succeed. You've got pass catchers in Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears at the running back position. They upgraded and brought in Calvin Ridley to go with DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd. Levis has every chance to be successful. I think he's going to be a nice bye week fill in. I do see him as the QB3. And don't sleep on Michael Penix. You know, Cousins is 38. He's got the ACL injury, the Achilles injury. I don't see him playing a ton this year. I don't think that's what the Falcons want, but 66 quarterbacks played last year, so don't sleep on it. Either way, Ryan's got 3 guys guaranteed for 2 spots, possibly 4, so he doesn't have a huge issue at the quarterback position. I tried to make some trades with Ryan this offseason. He texted me and said he's got a running back problem. Ryan, you don't have a running back problem. You have a ceiling running back problem, but you've got more than enough guys to look at this running back room, man. It's the deepest in the league. He's got more than enough guys. Yes, he does not have ceiling, and that's okay. The days of Derrick Henry being a bruiser and being the old Derrick Henry in Tennessee are behind him with age and obviously in Baltimore, but I very, very realistically see a double-digit touchdown season in Derrick Henry's range of outcomes, and that's what you need from Derrick Henry. So Ryan's got a great opportunity there to not have to worry too much about touchdowns from Derrick Henry and just kind of put guaranteed points into the team every week. Derrick Henry does not catch passes. It is half PPR, but Travis Etienne does. So I think you've got kind of a nice yin and yang there in his in his running back room. Where the touchdowns should come from Henry, and then Etienne should provide more fantasy points through his pass catching. But either way, RB1, RB2, no problems. Blake Corum's interesting. You know, I think he could have some value. It's still Kyron's job. We'll get to Kyron later. The Rams historically feature 1 running back. So Blake Corum is a nice insurance policy. But what I like here is Javonte Williams is the starter on his team. Ramondre is the starter on his. Both offenses project to be New England and Denver bottom 10 teams, but there's not a ton of competition. Jaleel McLaughlin provides a little competition for Javonte, but I still think it's Javonte's job. Khalil Herbert's probably getting traded if DeAndre Swift and Roschon are both healthy. So I think he could be an interesting player for Ryan later in the season if he does leave Chicago and goes to a team that needs a running back. And I really like Jerome Ford. Nick Chubb's on IR. I think Jerome Ford's going to maintain his role even when Nick Chubb comes back. Ultimately, you have seen Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt historically for Cleveland be able to coexist. I think you're going to see that again with Jerome Ford. I think he's a great player to target if you are doing a draft this weekend. Go get Jerome Ford. He's going to be great to start the season, and then you can either trade him at his peak or keep him if you need him. So I like Ryan's options here for bye weeks, for fill-ins. Obviously, Henry and Etienne lock down the top 2 spots, but Ryan's got options here at the running back spot. As we move to wide receiver, we enter the best wide receiver room in the league. No questions asked. A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, T. Higgins, and our good friend JSN. I think the only challenge for Ryan is figuring out how to play Collins and Tank together, because Ryan also has Dalton Schultz as his tight end. So that's a lot of one team with Houston. Obviously, they can't all score on the same play. So it's possible that Tank or Nico wind up on the trade block later this season. They both would get good value in return. So it's not like you're just giving a player away. You're getting good value for a good player. But I do think that you have to figure that out. Either way, you've got A.J. Brown, who should return to wide receiver 1 season. Garrett Wilson, people expect a wide receiver 1 season. Somebody in Houston's going to finish inside the top 15. I see that room as Nico Collins as the 1A, Tank as the 1B, and Steph Diggs as the 3. And then T. Higgins getting a big boost right now because Jamar Chase is in the building but not practicing and is going to probably start the season pretty slowly. So Ryan's got a fantastic way to play this team. His running back room, again, is doesn't have ceiling. It's good, but it's thin. So I think you see Ryan, like Mike, playing with 5 wide receivers in his flex spots. And then obviously Dalton Schultz, Cade Otton, and Pat Freiermuth, all 3 probably similar ranges of outcomes, but they're not going to blank you. You're going to get, 40 to 60 yards each week. And if that week also adds a touchdown, you're very happy. I see Ryan as a top 6 team this year, and I think we'll see if it's a playoff team here at the end of the show, but definitely in the top 6 fighting for one of those 4 playoff spots. As we get into the middle of the league here, David's team, we see Patrick Mahomes, the alpha, one of the alphas at the position. I, I don't see him returning to overall QB1, but he's going to finish as a QB1. He's as safe as it gets. Put him in your QB1 spot. Don't look back. Tua Tagovailoa, going to be a really high-end QB2 in my mind this season, finishing in that 11 to 15 range. He's got great weapons. We love the offense in Miami. He did play and stay healthy all season last year, so it certainly can be done. And he just got the contract. So Ryan, David's got Mahomes and Tua QB1, QB2, and he moves on. Minshew's the starter for now. I think it probably flip-flops a bit back and forth between him and O'Connell. And then Bryce Young, similar to Will Levis, is playing for his contract. He's the 101, and he's obviously had one of the worst historical seasons ever last year. But Dave Canales is in town. He's the quarterback whisperer. He fixed Geno Smith. He got Baker Mayfield last year to a QB1 season. He's now the head coach for the Carolina Panthers. So for fill-ins, for bye weeks, Bryce Young's at least a starter. David's got 3 guys for 2 spots, but realistically, it's Mahomes and Tua. David's got an alpha. He's got JT. I think it's possible he has a range of outcomes ceiling overall RB1 season. I don't know if he gets there with the presence of Richardson, but we've seen him do it before. So he's certainly in that range of outcomes. Rachaad White, I think Bucky Irving's relevant this season. I really like Bucky. I don't know how much it eats into Rachaad White's work and volume. I think it maybe eats into his pass catching, but not his touchdowns. So it's probably more than likely an RB2 season for Rachaad White. I don't know if he finishes in that top 10, but it's certainly possible. Again, with Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator, leaving, that maybe changes the scheme a little bit. But again, JT and Rachaad White, really solid options at the 2 top running back spots. With Raheem Mostert and DeAndre Swift kind of in the mix, I think you've really got 3 guys that can fill in the RB2 because JT is obviously the plug-and-play RB1. As we get into David's wide receiver room, it's really thin. So I think Mostert and Swift probably have some flex appeal for David on a weekly basis. The wide receiver room, alpha of alphas, Justin Jefferson. Look, bet on talent. Justin Jefferson is going to bring Sam Darnold along with him versus Sam Darnold having to be good to support a wide receiver 1 season for Justin Jefferson. The discount is already in redraft. You're getting JJ somewhere between this 106 and 108, 109. If that's you in a draft this weekend, please don't worry about Sam Darnold. Bet on the talent of Justin Jefferson and take the discount of getting someone who is, outside of injury, going to finish as a wide receiver 1. He's probably going to be wide receiver 8, 9, or 10, but that's what you're paying for, and that's what you're drafting him as. Obviously, in Dynasty, you've had him for a while. With J.J. McCarthy coming back next season, we'll see what his range of outcomes looks like. Don't worry about Justin Jefferson. Jalen Waddle, Christian Kirk filling in the wide receiver 2 and 3 role here. I love Waddle. I was very, very high on him coming off of the injury kind of down season he had last year as a bounce back candidate. I still am. I'm cooling just a little bit this week as we get into football season next week, just because he's got that non-contact jersey on and he's had it for a while. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. I think he's going to be fine. But again, sometimes these injuries just sort of linger. But Jalen Waddle should be a clear wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside for this team, and Christian Kirk filling in that wide receiver 3 role. And then it's Xavier Worthy, and that's it. Worthy is, I think, going to be flex worthy. I think he can certainly be a wide receiver 3. I don't see him right away overtaking Christian Kirk on this team. I do think it's possible he overtakes him later in the season, but David's got 4 guys for 3 spots. And then it's really thin, except for a little bit of a dart throw here on Pop Douglas in New England and Dontavian Wicks in Green Bay. Dalton Kincaid, I think, is going to be the breakout player at the tight end position this season, other than Trey McBride. I think both of them are going to be fantastic. I love Kincaid. I love the fact that there's 287 or whatever crazy number I forgot off the top of my head, targets that were vacated in Buffalo. Kincaid and James Cook should inherit a ton of that, along with Keon Coleman. So locked and loaded tight end 1, who I believe is going to finish inside the top 5 at the position. And then obviously Ben Sennett's really fun. He's an interesting player. They just traded Jahan Dotson. So I like Washington and what they're doing. I don't expect them to be very good this year, but that's okay. For fantasy, I think Sennett's going to have a role. So if Kincaid needs somebody on the bye week, Sennett's going to be a great fill in for him. The wide receiver room here it's just too thin for me. And the realistically, JT is the only ceiling player at running back. So I don't see David in the top 6 this season. He's got some pieces. He's going to win games because of the ceiling of Mahomes and Jefferson and JT. I'm certainly going to be a competitive team. I just think over the life of a fantasy season, if anything happens in that wide receiver room, that's ultimately going to keep him out of that top 6 and out of that top 4 playoff spots. As we get to Greg's team here, newcomer to the league, Greg went out and made some really good trades. So he's got some new players in the team here. CJ Stroud occupying the QB1 spot, last year's reigning offensive rookie of the year. Everyone is expecting Stroud to take a year 2 leap and jump into that top 10. I do think that happens this season. So lockdown should be a lockdown QB1 for Greg. Caleb Williams, look, you're watching Hard Knocks. You're excited about Caleb Williams. You love the offense in Chicago. I don't think he's going to break the 4,000-yard mark. I think he's going to get really, really close. And I do think he's going to finish as a QB2. And that's going to be a really good rookie season for Caleb. So you've got a QB1 in Stroud, a QB2 in Williams, but I do think it's a high-end QB2. So I like what Greg's got going on at the top 2 spots there. The problem in Greg's quarterback room is that's all there is. Justin Fields is you could pull your hair out trying to figure out what's going on in Pittsburgh. I don't think Justin Fields will win the job from Russell Wilson, who's been named the week 1 starter. I think Russell Wilson will eventually lose it, and that's how Justin Fields will get on the field. And then obviously Jake Browning is not relevant without an injury to Burrow, which we hope doesn't happen. So it's very thin. It's top heavy. So it's a great QB1 and 2, but there's just not much else. At the running back spot, Greg made a nice trade to acquire Kyren Williams. Historically, the Rams have been a one running back type team. Kyren is Sean McVay's guy. I'm not overly concerned with Blake Corum eating into his value. I think some people were kind of thinking that was going to be more of a timeshare early in the offseason. I don't see it that way. I think Corum will be relevant, but not enough to detract from what Kyren should still do. And then Alvin Kamara, Zach Moss, Trey Benson, and Ty Chandler are all interesting pieces to me to kind of fill in that RB2 spot. Ryan Ramczyk is out for the year for the Saints. He is their best offensive tackle. I think that lowers the ceiling for Kamara's rushing. But the good news is Kamara's never been a great rusher. He's been more of a pass catcher, and that's where his value has been at the RB2 spot. At the RB spot. So I think he's a nice RB2 for Greg because of the pass catching upside. It's half PPR. So Kyren and the Kamara with Moss and Benson providing an RB2 fill-in or some flex appeal as well. As we move down here, we can see CeeDee Lamb, the alpha of alphas, wide receiver 1 last year. Certainly another wide receiver 1 season is almost guaranteed to him. I don't know if it's the overall wide receiver 1, but there's outside of injury, there's just not a chance he doesn't finish inside the top 10. I think realistically, probably his floor is wide receiver 5. So you've got one of the top guys at the position in CeeDee Lamb. And then DJ Moore and Rashee Rice, to me, are the wide receivers 2 and 3 on this team, even though they're the wide receiver 1s on their own teams. So that's awesome. Calvin Ridley, certainly a player that I would flex on a weekly basis. And then outside of that, there isn't anybody else. So it's a little thin at the wide receiver position. It's got a lot of ceiling, but the floor falls out really, really hard after that. So we'll see what happens with Greg as it pertains to health this year. And you got Travis Kelce, certainly capable of finishing as the overall tight end 1, even though he hasn't in 2 years. But I think it's pretty easy to see the volume and the touchdowns coming his way. So no stress for Greg at the tight end position. Colby Parkinson and Chigo Okonkwo are actually interesting to me. Parkinson, obviously, because Higbee is on the pup for at least the first 4 weeks, and I like the Rams offense. And, Chig's still relevant. Tennessee's going to throw the ball at a pretty high rate. And so we'll see what that looks like for him. Ultimately, for Greg's season outcome, the quarterback room and the tight end room, or excuse me, the running. Let me try that again. Quarterback room and the wide receiver room, they're just too thin for me. Greg's going to win games over the life of a season, though. I don't have him inside my top six right now, fighting for the top four playoff spots. DJ, another newcomer to the league. Look, I think other than Mike, this is the best quarterback room, in the league. You got Kyler Murray, who's coming off of the ACL. He's healthy. He's ready to go. He obviously has rushing upside. What did they do this offseason, the Cardinals? They drafted Trey Benson to bolster that backfield, and they grabbed, let's not give him a Hall of Fame jacket quite yet, but they grabbed a generational talent in Marvin Harrison Jr. to go along with Michael Wilson and Trey McBride. As a Niners fan, it hurts me to say this, but I really like what the Cardinals are doing. Kyler Murray should be a quarterback one this season. He is the quarterback one for DJ, and that's fantastic anytime you look at your lineup. Kirk Cousins is the QB2. Look, he's 38. He's coming off the Achilles. He's in a new city with a new team. I don't know that Atlanta's offense is better than what he had in Minnesota. I think the running back is better in Atlanta, and I think the receivers are better in Minnesota. But I think Cousins finishes as a low-end QB2. I know historically he's flirted with QB1 numbers and has been a QB1. I don't see that for him this season with the age and the Achilles, but he's going to be a QB2 safely. So with Kyler Murray and Kirk Cousins, your DJ is very, very comfortable on a weekly basis with his quarterbacks. And you got Derek Carr and Deshaun Watson, whose floors are high and ceilings are low, but they're starters on their own team and they're safe. Saquon Barkley is the alpha in this team. He is one of the players that I believe has the overall RB1 in his range of outcomes. Yes, Jason Kelce has retired. I think that helps Barkley. I say that because I think it means that although the tush push is still going to be a very relevant play, I don't think it is 100% guaranteed they will do it every time. Don't risk getting Jalen Hurts injured. Give the ball to Saquon every now and again and let him go and grab a goal line touchdown. Barkley's going to have tremendous touchdown upside with absolutely no competition. Sneaky pick. I do think he's my sneaky pick to be the overall RB1 this season. I think he has a ton of upside. I love Saquon Barkley this year. Joe Mixon is the only running back in the NFL to have 3 consecutive RB1 seasons over the last 3 years. I don't think that happens for him this season. I think his streak ends. I do think he finishes as a high-end RB2. I believe that simply because the receivers are just so darn good in Houston. And Stroud doesn't run, so he's a pocket guy. He's a pocket passer. But I think Mixon as an RB2 to go with Saquon is completely safe and very, very comfortable for DJ. I really like Bucky Irving. I think Bucky is going to have a really good role this season in Tampa. He's a pass catcher, so that gives him a little boost because this is half PPR. And then look, Nick Chubb is on injured reserve. It's 4 weeks for sure. I think it's probably more like 6 to 8 weeks before he comes back and really ramps up. And even if he does, Jerome Ford's not going away. So look, Nick Chubb's going to score touchdowns. He's going to have some appeal for you. I think it's going to be a nice piece for DJ to add in the second half of the year when he really needs, that extra boost. And it's still Nick Chubb. The ceiling is lower than it has been, but the floor is still very safe. So yeah, I think it's going to be a good piece for him. So I got Chubb, Irving, Mixon, and Barkley, 4 guys for 2 spots in that room. DJ's strength, similar to some of the other teams we've already talked about, having an alpha running back is the wide receiver room. And he's got Amon-Ra, who is the alpha in Detroit. He's certainly been paid as a top 5 wide receiver. I really don't see a world where he finishes outside of the top 5. I don't know if overall wide receiver 1 is in his range of outcomes because there are other guys that can take away from his total volume in Detroit. But I don't see a world where he finishes outside the top 5 again, and I think he's about as safe as it gets. Whew, Brandon Ayuk, thank you. He has been paid. He is hopefully happy now. And look, he's going to be the same as he always is. He's going to be a guy when it's his week, he's going to win you a week. And when it's George Kittle's week and when it's Deebo Samuel's week, Ayuk's going to take a hit. That's just how it goes in San Francisco. but he's a great wide receiver too for DJ. I love Mike Evans on this roster for one more ride off into the sunset, 1,000 yards. You can put that in the bank for Mike Evans. I don't know if he gets to 10 touchdowns, but I think he gets 7 to 8. So 1,000 yards and 7 is your wide receiver 3 is fantastic. Give me Amari Cooper in that flex spot with Deontay Johnson, Jalen McMillan, and I'm really excited. I love Keon Coleman. I've been rising on Keon Coleman. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo, but DJ's got Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir. So like Ryan, I think one of those Buffalo guys is probably going on the trade block because it's hard to have all three, but someone in Buffalo is going to be Josh Allen's go-to guy. I think it's between Shakir and Coleman in the wide receiver position. So DJ's got a really strong wide receiver room. And then Brock Bowers locking down the tight end position. I think DJ's a top 6 team, and I do think he's fighting for one of those 4 playoff spots. John, look, Jalen Hurts, let's not spend a ton of time on it, can absolutely be the overall QB1. I know I just mentioned Jason Kelce retired. I don't see 15 rushing touchdowns again in Jalen Hurts' season, but I think it's very realistic he flirts with 10. So it's still going to be a great rushing season for him. Obviously, the passing volume's already there. And Jaden Daniels is awesome. It was a fantastic. John had the best draft in the rookie draft this season, no questions asked. Jaden Daniels' rushing upside is already there. He's a much better passer than people give him credit for. He throws a really good ball. And I think Washington's going to be rough this season, but give me Jalen Hurts and Jaden Daniels is probably the highest ceiling rushing, quarterback room with the rushing that's built in the league. After that, it's thin. Aiden O'Connell, him and Minshew, even if O'Connell plays, the ceiling's very low. And then Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, good luck. Spin the wheel and figure out which one you get on which week. So Wilson's the guy for now, but I do think it's difficult to project him being the starter the whole season. So great quarterback room, very top heavy up top, but the floor is pretty low for the bottom half. At the running back position, it's interesting because I think James Conner is going to have a lot of touchdown upside. Kyler runs, but there's also finally some really good pass catching options there. Trey Benson's there, which scares me for James Conner, but Conner is still the guy until he's not. And I think he's going to get a lot of work in that offense. KW3, again, is the guy until he's not, even with the presence of Zach Charbonnet. So good RB pairing there with Conner and Walker. Aaron Jones, certainly in the mix for your RB spot on a weekly basis. And then I think Chase Brown and Tyler Algier could be interesting. You know, they're in kind of Algier is a very expensive, but a very, very necessary insurance policy in Atlanta for Bijan. And Chase Brown's probably in less of a committee with Zach Moss than people think, but I do think he's going to be relevant. And if you have Zach Moss, you're going to be frustrated by Chase Brown. If you have Chase Brown, you're going to be frustrated by Zach Moss. But I think for John's purposes, he's going to still score and he's going to have some useful weeks. And that's what you need. John's wide receiver room. I really love Marvin Harrison. How can you not? He should be fantastic as the wide receiver 1 here. Devontae Adams is old, but for one last ride, let's go ahead and give the guy who got the second most targets in the NFL last year another top 5 NFL target share. And Terry McLaurin is now the only show in town with the trading of Jahan Dotson. So 3 guys there, that Harrison, Adams, and McLaurin that John should start every week. Jamison Williams, A.D. Mitchell, Roman Wilson when he gets healthy, Javon Baker, and Darnell Mooney certainly in the mix for John with Josh Downs as flex appeal guys, injuries, bye weeks. So it's not a super deep wide receiver room, but it's not thin. It's kind of right in the middle, and that's John's building a good roster here. I like what he's doing. Sam Laporta, I don't see the overall tight end 1 back-to-back seasons in a row. I don't see double-digit touchdowns, but I see a very easy top 5 season in Sam Laporta's future this year. I don't think you have anything to worry about. You love the Lions offense and what they're doing. So awesome at the tight end position for John to have Sam Laporta there as a steady performer each and every week. I think there's enough rushing volume and the receivers are really solid. And then Laporta is a difference maker at the position. So I do see John in the top 6 fighting for the top 4 playoff spots. John's nephew, my good buddy James Gelman, my college buddy. Let's look at this group here. Season number 2 of an MVP performance for Lamar Jackson. Don't worry about Lamar Jackson. Put him in your lineup every week and be happy you have him. Matt Stafford is Matt Stafford. He's old. He's banged up. He has been old for what feels like forever. He has been banged up for what has felt like forever, and he just gets it done. I love Matt Stafford this season. I think this is it. I think this is probably Stafford's swan song. If it's not this year, it's next year before retirement. But I love Puka. I love Cooper Cup. And at the end of the day, Aaron Donald just retired, meaning their defense outside of Aaron Donald be retirement, they lost some other pieces. Their defense is awful. And that's what you want in fantasy. You want a terrible defense paired with a fantastic options on offense. And that's what Stafford has. So I think Stafford finishes as a low end QB2, but because Lamar Jackson's rushing upside is so high, it balances it out. And I think you got a nice pairing with Jackson and Stafford. James will be hoping and praying that Daniel Jones never has to see the field, and neither does Hendon Hooker, because it's just there's no ceiling. It's super low. So similar to some other, to Greg's quarterback room, super top heavy, as we get into kind of looking at the running backs here. So Christian McCaffrey, let's spend 30 seconds on it. He has been the RB1. He can be the RB1. It's a very real chance he finishes as the overall RB1 again. The calf strain doesn't bother me that much. I think he's healthy. I think he's been rehabbing. He's good to go. Put him in your lineup. He is basically a hybrid wide receiver running back. Move on. I think David Montgomery is a league winner. I had him on my main show as a league winner 2 weeks ago when we did the league winners episode. I think Monty can coexist with Gibbs. I think Gibbs can go and play in a variety of different roles. If you read the preseason and camp reports, they're putting him out in the slot. They're motioning him out of the backfield. Monty's touchdown upside is fantastic because he's a bigger body back than Gibbs. I think David Montgomery is a very high upside RB2 this season and a plug and play next to Christian McCaffrey on a weekly basis for James. Tajay Spears and Devin Singletary are really interesting as flex options because James's wide receiver room is very, very thin. I do think both of those guys will probably be in his flex. But I like Spears. I think Pollard is the guy for now. I think as the season wears on, you're going to see Tajay Spears be the 1A and Tony Pollard be the 1B. And Devin Singletary, look, the Giants suck. They're going to be a bottom 10 offense, but all the touchdowns they score should go through Devin Singletary and Malik Neighbors. And that's what you want. A lot of volume there. Tyrone Tracy was hot for a minute. He did not look good in preseason. Eric Gray has looked better. I think it's Singletary's job, and I think he's going to get all the work that he can handle. As we move to the wide receiver position here, you can see Jamar Chase, George Pickens, and Tyler Lockett occupying the top 3 spots. I've got some concerns in this room because outside of those 3, there's nobody else. And additionally, Jamar Chase isn't practicing. And that I'm not upset by that because I do think he's going to play. But look, it's Friday, August 30th, and we're 6 days away from football. I wonder next week's going to be really important for Jamar Chase. I think you're going to have to really see if you're in a redraft league. I think you're going to potentially get a discounted value in the first round. I think he's going to drop. And he hasn't practiced. He hasn't played at all. So even if he starts week 1, expect it to be a lower ceiling. I think he needs time to ramp up. He's got to get game fitness. He's got to get reps. He's still Jamar Chase, so he can do things that only about 4 or 5 other guys in the league can do. But yeah, it's going to be a slow start. And I would just say this as a caveat. If next week he's not practicing, the team has not said this. This is my speculation. I think it's possible he holds out. I do. He is the only wide receiver in the league that is an alpha that has not been paid. And if you've seen the contracts for CD and for Ayuk and for Amon-Ra, come through and Tyreek Hill not getting new years, but getting new money, Jamar Chase is in that conversation. I 100% believe he deserves to be paid. I think it's difficult to say he'll get paid next year because what if a catastrophic injury occurs? So it just there's some hesitation with Jamar Chase to start the season. I think once he gets going, he'll be fine. But he's certainly the player to watch this week. George Pickens is the only show in town, but it's Arthur Smith. It's a rotating quarterback situation, and George Pickens is volatile. He's going to give you weeks where he, 4 catches for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns and score you 30 fantasy points, and then he's going to disappear for 2 or 3 weeks. So it's hard for me to project a wide receiver 2 season for Pickens with that quarterback situation. I think it's in his range of outcomes. I think more than likely finishes as a wide receiver 3. Tyler Lockett's still the wide receiver 2 in Seattle. Him and JSN are kind of fighting for snaps. Lockett's kind of banged up right now. JSN seems to be healthy. They both profile very similarly, whereas DK is very different. So I still see Tyler Lockett as the starter in 2 wide receiver sets over JSN for now, but we'll see how that goes. But either way, Lockett's going to give you wide receiver 3 numbers. So it's a safe floor, but not a very high ceiling. So there's sadly no one else worth talking about in this wide receiver room. So let's move to tight end. Cole Kmet and Tucker Kraft. James will stream one of the 2 of them on a weekly basis until Hawkinson is ready. Just like Nick Chubb, just like Jonathan Brooks, Hawkinson's on IR. He is going to miss 4 weeks. The ACL is not fully recovered. It's probably going to be more like weeks 6, 7, or 8 before he's fully healthy. And Sam Darnold's your quarterback. So your ceiling's a little bit lower, obviously, than what you would have had with Kirk Cousins. I think it's Cole Kmet and Tucker Kraft probably for the majority of this season, actually. And we'll see what Hawkinson, looks like coming back. I love Lamar Jackson. I love Christian McCaffrey. Here's the truth. The 2 of them can win you a week by yourself. I just don't see enough in the wide receiver room. I don't have James in the top 6 right now because of that wide receiver room being so thin. He's going to win games because of the ceiling from McCaffrey and Jackson. I just don't know if it'll be enough to crack that top 6. Eric, in my opinion, second best draft this offseason, and he only drafted 2 players. So you say, well, how can he have the best draft if he only drafted 2 guys? He made some fantastic trades. I really, really like the route that he chose to go. He sold the 101 and he got a haul. He got a haul for it. So I think it was a really smart trade. Brock Purdy, I do see a quarterback 1 season in the best offense in the league. And Aaron Rodgers, similar to Kirk Cousins, 40 years old, 41 years old, Achilles injury, ayahuasca, New York. He's a crazy man. Not kidding. Low end QB2, but I think that's fine. Bo Nix on the taxi squad for Eric right now, even though he's the starter. I think Nix's second half of the year could be interesting. And Sam Darnold's the starter until he's not. He has no competition now with McCarthy out for the year. So Eric's got 3 guys guaranteed for 2 spots, and really 4 if he wants to, drop Flacco and put Nix on the active roster. I think he'll probably hold Nix on the taxi for as long as he can, which makes sense. So yeah, good quarterback room. I think a QB1 season and a QB2 season from your QB1 and 2. Here's one of the trades Eric made, brings in Josh Jacobs. I'll be honest, I was pretty low on Josh Jacobs this offseason. I really like Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd's hurt. He's got a hamstring injury. A.J. Dillon just put on season-ending IR. Jordan Love does not run. He is a pocket passer. It is Josh Jacobs' running back position. It is his room. He's going to get all of the goal line work. He does catch passes. The wide receivers in Green Bay, there's a lot of them. So I don't know if Jacobs' pass volume will be super heavy, but it'll be kind of a little cherry on top. I have a hard time projecting Jacobs in the top 10. I don't see a RB1 season for him, but I think he's in that 11 to 15 range pretty safely, and a really good RB1 to have on your roster. So safety for Eric with Josh Jacobs. To fill that RB2, we're looking at Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren with Gus Edwards mixed in. It's hard to have Najee and Warren, but I do think they can coexist. They finished as the RB20 and 24 respectively last year. So it's certainly possible that they can both be relevant for Eric. Gus to me is fantastic because of the touchdown upside. 13 rushing touchdowns last year in Baltimore in a Greg Roman offense, which is exactly who the offensive coordinator is in Los Angeles. I do not believe in J.K. Dobbins. I believe that he is done, and I'm okay being wrong. If he proves me wrong, I want him to prove me wrong for the players' sake. But those catastrophic injuries, the way he's had them, I just don't see him factoring in a ton and taking it away from Gus. So I like Gus, and I like the touchdown upside. I think Najee starts the year as the RB2 with Jacobs, but Gus could mix in there for Eric as well. Eric's got a really nice wide receiver room. He added DK Metcalf in that trade, which I really love. Look, Debo's on San Francisco. All of the San Francisco guys, when it's their week, they win you the week. That's just what happens. The volatility you have to live with San Francisco is when it's not their week, they don't produce a ton for you. So that's okay because the ceiling's very high for Debo. I love Cooper Kupp. If you are in a redraft league this weekend that's drafting, please grab Cooper Kupp in the third round. You will be so happy that you did. I do see a path where he can outproduce Puka Nacua. I believe that is in his range of outcomes. Love me some Cooper Kupp this season. And look, DK Metcalf is the touchdown guy in Seattle. He is the go-to in targets for Geno. So I really like those top three with Chris Godwin, Jaden Reed absolutely being flex worthy. And Jalen Polk's interesting because New England is such a mess, and I project them to be a bottom 10 offense, but they have no receivers. And Jalen Polk could absolutely be the guy. So I love that draft pick for Eric in the third round this year. And I do see a world where him and Javon Baker could actually end up being Jacoby Brissett / Drake May's guys for the Patriots. So the running back room's pretty thin. I project Eric to also play 5 wide receivers, the 3 starters and the 2 flex. And then the nice part about Eric's tight end room is he's got 3 great players. He's got Pitts and Njoku and Evan Ingram. Njoku, of course, was a league winner last year. Evan Ingram was the tight end too. So to have Kyle Pitts as the worst performing guy in your tight end room is a good problem to have. I think the challenge for Eric is who do you play? So I think he'll just take a look at the matchups each week and figure out who has the most favorable matchup. Take your shot. Hope you're right. But again, you don't have a tight end problem because you've got 3 guys that are always going to give you 60 to 70 yards and have a lot of touchdown upside. So I really like what he's got going on there. I have Eric in the top 6, fighting for the playoff spots. I really, like I said, I really liked his draft. I think he improved his team a lot this offseason. Let's wrap up quickly with Phil's team. Anthony Richardson, Jordan Love as the quarterback 1 and 2, rushing upside from Richardson, pocket passer QB5 season from Love last season. Geno Smith and Drake May in reserve, mostly Geno Smith. Drake May probably will win the job at some point, but again, the Patriots are not going to be great, so it's not a great ceiling for Drake May his rookie year. Drake May is certainly a dynasty pick, but not a great redraft, and his first year outlook isn't solid. But 3 guys for 2 spots for Phil at the quarterback spot. Phil has the smallest running back room in the league, but it's all ceiling, and that's if you've kind of listened to any of my content. I've taken a kind of stars and scrubs approach with this team where I'm very, very top heavy, and then I don't have much else. And that's okay. I can live with that volatility. So Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs as the RB1 and 2 with Devon Achane, James Cook, and Isaiah Pacheco. All 5 of those guys have potential to finish inside the RB1 range in the top 10. So solid there. There's nobody else in the room. But again, the way that I've built this team, that's what I'm comfortable living with. So I don't really feel like I need anything else until everybody gets hurt. And then I'm sending you guys a bunch of trade offers. At the wide receiver position, Tyreek Hill, Devonta Smith, Michael Pittman holding down the top 3 spots. Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors, the 2 rookies who will take some time to develop, but obviously are going to be flex-worthy players, and then certainly can fill in on the receiving side. I know it's my team, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but as a player, listen to this take really quickly. I really like Michael Wilson. I think if you can go and grab Michael Wilson late in drafts, he's going to be a value this year. I think Kyler is going to have a great season. And ultimately, I think there's just a lot of options in Arizona, but Michael Wilson seems to be a solidified wide receiver 2 for that team behind Marvin Harrison. And Zay Jones just got a 5-game suspension. So it is a very real possibility that Michael Wilson is a locked and loaded starter for the Cardinals every week. So obviously in this roster, he's not going to play a ton, but he's a good player. So if you're doing a redraft league this weekend and Michael Wilson falls to you in the double-digit rounds, go and scoop him up. Trey McBride, obviously at the tight end position here, you can see probably not the overall tight end one, but certainly in the top 5 this season. I think probably tight end 3 is his ceiling. And then, Theo Johnson, who's interesting, Hunter Henry, who's interesting. So Phil has some, dart throws here at the tight end position outside of McBride. I do see this team as a top 6 team fighting for the top 4 playoff spots. So that's the league breakdown. And now that you know we've got 6 teams, let's talk about who I project to be in the top 4 making those playoffs. Ryan and Phil's team are going to be there, I think, barring crazy injuries. I'm excited for Ryan because his team, it's so good. And he's just been bitten by that injury bug. So I think this is the year it happens for him. I think Phil and Ryan get the top spots in the first 2 playoff spots. And that leaves Mike, DJ, John, and Eric, 4 teams for the last 2 spots. As we get into these teams, I do see very similar ranges of outcomes. I'll scroll down in the wide receiver rooms. I think all of them have good wide receiver rooms. I think the ceilings are pretty similar for some of them. At the tight end, there's not a ton of weaknesses for them. You've got John with Laporta. Eric, we talked about, has great tight ends. Bowers is going to be great in Dynasty, even though it's going to take him a while to get there. And then obviously Mike's got Andrews and Kittle. So let's go up to the top since those are all pretty even. What I'm looking at now is the running backs and the quarterbacks. I think ultimately, I love James Conner and KW3. I don't see RB1 season for either of them. I think they both finish as RB2s. Aaron Jones will miss time. So while John has probably the best quarterback room of these 4 teams, or the highest ceiling with his 2 starters, I just don't know if there's enough in the running back room this season. So I think he misses out narrowly on the playoffs. And then when I take a look at Eric's room, it's very similar. Like the running backs, I don't see any RB1s there. And the quarterbacks, Purdy and Rodgers, I like, but they just don't quite have that same ceiling because neither of them run. So I think it's going to be really interesting when Mike and DJ and John and Eric play each other this season, because I do think the winners of those games is going to determine the outcome. Ultimately, I think Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley are such difference makers at the running back position, given that everyone's wide receivers are pretty similar. I think that pushes DJ and Mike over the top, and I see Phil, Mike, Ryan, and DJ getting the 4 playoff spots this season, with John and Eric competing very closely to potentially mix up that order. But that's how I see it today. Either way, if I'm wrong, won't be the first time, won't be the last, but a lot of things will change. We know injuries are going to happen. That's the game of football. We know players are going to emerge late on that you never expected to be fantasy relevant. One thing is for sure, it's going to be a heck of a fun season. I hope you guys are excited for it. We are 6 days away from football. Thanks for jumping in and listening to a little special season-long preview for the Players Club here. And as always, thanks for supporting me and the Extra Point.